There's a skyscraper in New York City with no windows. It's 550 feet tall, brutalist in design, and for decades, the public was told it was simply a telecom building. But the truth, layered in Cold War secrecy, goes much deeper than that. So, why did New York need this bizarre windowless skyscraper? What are the vents on the side? And how did America's phone system become so centralized? Stay tuned to find out, as today we uncover the hidden history behind America's communication empires and the mysterious structure that it left behind. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. To understand how New York ended up with this windowless skyscraper built for phone calls, we have to go all the way back to when wires first began crossing America. When Alexander Graham Bell made his first call in 1876, the telephone felt like magic. But almost immediately, its physical and social side effects began to show. Cities filled with webs of overhead wires, crisscrossing streets in every direction. These lines weren't just unsightly, they snapped in storms, overloaded poles, and created maintenance nightmares. But the more interesting shift happened inside people's homes. Now tethered to their walls by a ring, some found themselves waiting for calls and structuring their entire day around the device. This was a change for the worse. As previously, communication was well thought out in letters or personal visits, whereas the phone brought fragmented voice clips, faster, yes, but arguably less meaningful. Privacy also took a hit. Many early systems used party lines, where strangers could eavesdrop, and soon enough, law enforcement joined the call, literally. As early as 1895, New York police were wiretapping suspected criminals, and hence the slippery slope of public service and surveillance had begun. Though there was a comedic aspect to it all. The first known prank call happened in 1884, when an undertaker was summoned on a false death report. Probably not the outcome Bell had imagined. Still, the phone brought progress and connected people in emergencies. Before the telephone, you couldn't exactly call for help. Someone had to run. In fact, families would send the fastest runner to reach firefighters and police officers the same. So, lives were indeed saved since voices could travel over the wire far faster than footsteps. Considering how much the positives outweighed the negatives, growth was rapid, and there was immense new demand for infrastructure. Wires needed to reach further, connect more people, and stay protected. And in New York, that meant one thing: burying the network. Under the streets, within massive switching centers and cable vaults, which began to appear across the city. Entire tunnels were dug to house the beating heart of the telephone system, unseen but absolutely essential. By the early 1900s, it wasn't enough to run wires through the air. To keep the system secure, New York continued burying the infrastructure. The very first phone vaults, built by AT&T and its regional arms, were reinforced concrete bunkers hidden beneath the city's streets. Inside were miles of copper cable, splice boxes and switching equipment, all of which was designed to be flood-resistant, tamper-proof, and, to the extent possible, invisible. These weren't just manholes with wires, they were secured environments with locked steel doors, temperature regulation, and service tunnels that ran for blocks. And the system only continued to evolve. By 1915, just a year after the first transcontinental phone call, America had over 10 million telephones in use, a staggering leap for a device barely 40 years old. The network had exploded into a national utility, and with it came questions of ownership, control, and vulnerability. According to a brief history of American telecommunications regulation, AT&T had emerged as the central power, branding itself as, quote, the natural monopoly. It built out massive switching centers, which were first manual, but then electrical-mechanical. This was done to handle not just the local, but long-distance routing. Calls now passed through class-based switches from local to regional and then national trunks. You could call San Francisco from New York, and the system would stitch together a path in milliseconds, an invisible relay race across a continent. But the more complex this system became, the more fragile it was. Sabotage, interception, or even weather could cripple entire sections. As noted in telecommunications and economic growth, this vulnerability sparked a parallel obsession with resilience. cables were doubled up, routes were diversified, and in dense cities like New York, redundancies often meant going deeper underground. Meanwhile, phones were changing daily life. The line between home and work blurred, businesses stayed open longer, and criminals began using payphones to avoid detection. Though that was often to little avail, as the government took a growing interest in what was being said over the wire. Wiretapping expanded well into the 20th century, sometimes under warrants and sometimes not, since the emerging technology had outpaced ethics. The infrastructure ultimately grew more centralized, but with this centralization came secrecy. Switching centers were no longer just buildings, they were critical infrastructure. Some, like the one at 32 Avenue of the Americas, looked like ordinary office towers, but they were packed with telecom hardware and guarded like federal facilities. Eventually, those early vaults, tunnels, and switching buildings gave way to something even more specialized, something hardened, something nuclear resistant. And in 1974, on a quiet stretch of Thomas Street in Lower Manhattan, that something began to rise. Located at 33 Thomas Street, this 550-foot skyscraper had no windows, not one. It was designed by prominent architect John Carl Warnke, a man best known for modern civic landmarks like the Hawaii State Capitol, and more intimately, for designing President Kennedy's gravesite at Arlington. In fact, Warnke shared a close personal relationship with Jacqueline Kennedy following JFK's assassination, a connection that adds an unexpected human layer to the story of this otherwise mechanical monument. What Warnke built here was unlike anything else in New York, a brutalist monolith of precast concrete panels. The building was created specifically for AT&T's long-distance division, which handled long-distance telephone service. Its appearance, hulking, vented, and impenetrable, earned it the nickname, the Death Star, and the most terrifying building in New York. Officially, it was a high-security telecom switching hub, purpose-built to house delicate and massive telephone equipment. Each floor was taller than normal to accommodate heat exhaust and cable racks. It featured its own diesel generators, water supply, and enough food stores to support a small crew for 2 weeks, reportedly designed to withstand an atomic blast. All of this makes sense for 1974, because this was the Cold War, and in an era where long-distance telephone service was not just commercial, it was strategic. Critical infrastructure like this had to be hardened, capable of functioning even if the unthinkable should happen. Still, even at that time, the building raised eyebrows. Why so secretive? Why so fortified? And why here, planted within Manhattan's dense urban grid? The public was told what they needed to know. It was a telephone building, and technically, that was true. But as decades went on, and as the digital communications replaced copper wire, the story began to feel a bit incomplete. Inside, the building operated around the clock as a switching center, routing calls not just across the US, but eventually into fiber optic systems that connected the world. From the outside, however, it remained silent. No logos, no windows, and no sign of life. Then, towards the end of the millennia, another shift began. Cell phones, email, and the internet. The world was suddenly talking more than ever, but not through landlines. If you've made a phone call in America any time in the last 50 years, there's a good chance it passed through here. 33 Thomas Street, sealed off from the outside world and designed to route millions of conversations a day, was never meant to be noticed. But as the world changed, this building, at least from the outside, stayed the same. Starting in the late 1990s, mobile phones and the internet began eroding the centralized systems 33 Thomas Street was built to serve. Calls were no longer tethered to copper wires. They flew through cell towers, Wi-Fi, and satellites. And with the convenience came something else: dependency. By 2010, the average person was checking their phone over 100 times a day. Today, more than half of teens say they feel addicted to their smartphones, and adults aren't far behind. Sleep disruption, rising anxiety, shrinking attention spans. These aren't bugs in the system. They're features of a culture built on constant connection. And what keeps that connection alive? Buildings like this. But in 2013, it was put into a very different kind of spotlight. That year, NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden leaked classified documents revealing the existence of a surveillance program housed in a location described as a fortified AT&T facility in Manhattan. Investigators cross-referenced the building specs, design details, and telecom maps. Everything pointed to one place: 33 Thomas Street. The building's blast-proof shell, the massive air vents, and security infrastructure all matched. What had once been seen as a marvel of telecommunications was now implicated as a possible listening post for the US government, intercepting not just international calls, but possibly domestic ones too. It's an unsettling thought that this silent, windowless monolith might be listening, and that the very infrastructure we built to connect us may also be used against us. And if all this sounds like bad news to you, well, you're not wrong. That's actually why I've been using the Modita Compact. I've been following this company for years, and even visited their office at one point. I genuinely believe in their actions. The Compact is a minimalist phone that strips away digital noise. No social media, no algorithmic chaos, just calls, offline maps, and music, all on this beautiful, crisp ink screen that's very easy on the eyes. In other words, this gem focuses on privacy and strips away digital noise. You can even sideload apps through their desktop tool, Modita Center, giving you flexibility without being overwhelmed. Hence, if you're ready to reclaim some peace from your tech, check it out by using the link below. There's also a 15% discount with the code IT'sHistory15. Just note, this does not apply to pre-orders. Meanwhile, 33 Thomas Street remains as it always has, sealed off and windowless. But in a world where digital life is more vulnerable than ever, the building no longer feels invisible. It feels like a message, one that says connection is power, and power, well, it never just disappears. And we'll leave it there for today, but I thank you all for watching, and until next time, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.